Trump is repeating Biden's mistakes in Ukraine: billions lost, NATO stretched thin, and corruption exposed. In this video, we reveal the real cost of U.S. strategy, the hidden deals, and why America's power may be collapsing.
The big mistake here is once again the same one that Trump has been making ever since he took office. He thinks it's 1991. It's not. The world has moved on. No one's waiting around for Washington to catch up. So let's assume that he's successful and all the Europeans join hand in hand with us. It's sort of like we all chain ourselves together and jump in Lake Michigan together. They're not going to do it. Doesn't make any sense. It's not going to have the effect that he wants. It would have been much easier if he had simply said, look, I've done all that I can do. I can't bring these parties together, but I'm no longer going to fund the war. I'm going to get out of it. I'm not going to fund it. I'm not going to support this regime any longer. But we never get that. We never get a comment from Trump that says this man Zelensky and this organized crime state that he has built, where he's got, $1.5 billion in cash in various bank accounts that he's successfully pilfered and stolen from all the money that we've shipped over to Ukraine. And then talk about, the terrible position of the Ukrainian people who desperately want an end to the war, because we know they do, even though they won't publish that polling data in the West. He could have done all those things, but he's never done it. He goes back to the Biden playbook. Oh, Russia is the problem. If we can only harm Russia further, then Russia will come to the negotiating table. It's not going to work. It's failed repeatedly. But, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome. That's Donald Trump. He's joined the insane club founded by his friend Joe Biden that preceded him. Well done, Joe.
Now, one has to ask, though, whether it is Biden 2.0 or Trump 1.5. I don't know, because Trump is also simultaneously with this, and a lot quieter, authorized two $500 million packages for Ukraine to include air defense missiles and long-range missiles, offensive missiles as well, with the promise that he's going to authorize up to $1 billion per month for the next 10 months for NATO to purchase to funnel onto Ukraine. But as you and I have talked about many times, our industrial capacity is not sufficient to make that much. So the only thing he can do is take it from existing stocks, which will lower our capacities further. Do you see this potentially as the intent, just to keep making money for the defense industry?
Well, I think that has to be taken into consideration. This is, I'm told by almost everybody in the administration that I talk to, that this is the most transactional administration in history. In other words, you put your money down for whatever it is that you want, and you're going to get it. I mean, they've effectively mortgaged off or sold off ambassadorships. Donate $2 million, you get to be ambassador in wherever you want to go. The same thing is true if you look at the Witkoff, Trump digital, currency exchange that is being set up that's attracted hundreds of millions of dollars of investment over in Qatar. I mean, all of this is sort of legalized grift, legalized dishonesty and deceit. I mean, I thought we were going to get past all of this, that we wouldn't be back where we were with Hunter Biden. But the more I see of this administration and the antics that are going on, all of which revolve around money, the only conclusion I can reach is that this is as corrupt as the predecessor. So I think the answer to your question is this is Biden 2. This is not Trump 1.5. The only spin that's being imparted to all of this is Donald Trump's, favorite mantra, which is, we'll sell it to you. What you do with it is your problem. Well, that's not leadership. This is not what you expect from a leader of one of the great nations on the planet, particularly if you're interested in any sort of peace coming about in the region. You would go back to what I said before. This shouldn't happen. If I had been president, it would never have happened. Remember all these speeches? Well, then, Mr. President, stop funding it, because he's not helping the Europeans. The Europeans are in serious fiscal trouble as it is. And whatever we get from these arms sales, while it may be helpful, isn't going to offset the $37 trillion national sovereign debt that we confront. So I'm tired of it. I'm just depressed because I think a lot of us that voted for the man thought more highly of him than he deserves.
Now, there's certainly a lot of buyer's remorse with as far as that goes. I want to take one last look there about this concept of continuing to give $1 billion worth of weapons and ammunition per month, because for many of the reports that I've read, if all of the war stopped tomorrow and everything in the Middle East stopped and we're not giving anything to either Israel or to Ukraine, it would take maximizing all of our industrial capacity somewhere between 5 and 7 years to bring back up to the proper level all of our inventories of stockpiles, et cetera, for ammunition, weapons, all that kind of stuff. But those are not over. In fact, there's apparently a $6 billion arms package that's getting ready to be put down for Israel on top of all of this. What does the net do to this, to our national security capacity, and are you worried about it?
Somebody who I trust very much, who is inside the Pentagon and is intimately familiar with all of the missile arsenals or missile inventories that you're discussing, and various other kinds of rocket weapons, says 8 to 10 years to recover unless we are very efficient. Of course, that's a huge, statement. If we're very efficient, we can rebound in 5 to 7 years. But he thinks that's unlikely because of all the different defense contractors, the different weapon systems, and Congress's constant meddling in the defense budget to ensure that they and their donors and constituents all get a share of the budget. So I think it's probably closer to 8 to 10 years than 5 to 7. But it may be that Donald Trump is making a mistake of assuming that we are invincible and vulnerable, that no one is really going to challenge us. And I think that's a mistake. If you look at the recent
very strong
Saudi Arabia, Pakistani,
NATO stepped up. When they went from 2% to 5%, that was great unity.
Sorry, we apparently have breaking news here.
And they're paying us for the weapons that we send. But that was a big day. That nobody thought a thing like that could happen. You had countries that weren't paying 2%, and now they're all paying 5%. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of weapons they're buying, and they're buying them from us. They're buying them from the U.S. In the old days, Biden gave them everything, gave them $350 billion worth of money and weapons. That's a lot of money and a lot of weapons, and we got really not much for it. We gave the money to Ukraine to fight, and they've proven they're very brave. I mean, look, they're fighting, and this is a war going on 3.5 years. And people thought it would be over quickly because Russia's a big military power, and Ukraine, I tell you, they are good fighters. Got to hand it to them. They have a lot of courage, a lot of guts. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you. That's kind of one of his common themes there, is that, look, Biden just gave all this money, the weapons away, but we're selling it, so we're actually making money. But just before that, we went to that break there. You were saying like the most likely case is not 5 to 7, but maybe 6 to 8 years. And that's once it stops, but it hasn't stopped yet. Now we're still giving it away. So that would seem that it's only going to continue to erode our capabilities, however much longer this goes in. Do you worry about that if we should get sucked into a war?
Well, that was the point I was trying to make, that the world has changed, and the weapon systems that can destroy us are on display in Russia right now, being used against Ukrainians. These weapons are proliferating. In other words, they're finding a home in other countries. And one of those, of course, is China, that has the largest manufacturing base in the world, and certainly the largest manufacturing base in the world devoted to military production. So the point is that he's essentially saying, look, I blackmailed our allies, and now they're paying up. Well, 5% from Bulgaria isn't a lot. 5% from Romania isn't a lot. 5% from Latvia or Finland is not a lot. In other words, we've got to be reasonable. And you're talking about uneven sums of money, uneven investments. There is no unity of effort. There is no unity of command in NATO. Purchases, buys, yes, most of it is going to be American military equipment, which is a great triumph, especially since we've seen a lot of evidence that our equipment doesn't perform very well. But of course, they're probably looking primarily at missiles and radars. Our radars are excellent, and I think most of our missiles are pretty good. But the whole thing is ridiculous. And what I was going to try and say about Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, if you look at this pact that they've got with China, that is pregnant with meaning. All sorts of things are going on with that. But the one thing you've got to keep in mind is that the Chinese will provide state-of-the-art missile technology, radar technology to both Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, and they will be paid handsomely in gold for it. And they're not the only ones. The Egyptians have conducted combined exercises with the Chinese, as the Iranians have, and the Chinese are providing some of the same technology to the Egyptians. So within the next few months, I suspect that you will see state-of-the-art missile batteries in Egypt that the Israelis can't cope with. And I think you're going to see the same thing happen in Saudi Arabia. I wouldn't be surprised if something similar happened in Turkey. In other words, China is changing the military balance in the region. And that change in that balance is something we cannot easily redress because they can outproduce us. And they're not alone. And they've had brilliant testing grounds called Ukraine. So they found out exactly what does and doesn't work. Bottom line is that that's the tip of the proverbial iceberg. That's also part of a change in the entire global economy where everybody is running away from the dollar. The dollar is plunging in value. We're debasing the currency. People are offloading it. The Chinese are offloading more treasuries. Everybody is trying to get rid of the dollar, which they see as a menace. They also see it as a weapon that can be used against them. They look at what we did to Russia. Well, we told the Russians, you're not going to have access to anything in the West anymore. We're cutting you out of SWIFT, and we're going to steal $300 billion of your money. So everybody looked at this and said, well, gee, then we need to find an alternative. And guess what? Yeah. They have an alternative, and that alternative is developing rapidly. China is at the heart of this thing. China is going to open gold vaults in Riyadh as well as in Hong Kong. What are these gold vaults for? They're almost warehouses. For instance, if the Chinese buy X amount of oil from the Saudis, for instance, the Saudis will be paid in gold. If the Saudis buy technology from China, the Chinese will be paid in gold. In other words, the yuan, which is their currency, is now gold backed. That's why they have been acquiring and hoarding as much gold as possible. I don't know what we have for gold holdings. I'm suspicious of any claims whatsoever. I hope we have at least half of what we claim. I just don't know. But the point is, this is a world in which right now we can't compete. So the de-dollarization goes hand in hand with the delivery of lethal missile technology to places like Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Egypt, Turkey. And all of these states are aligned against Israel. So this is a big deal. That has to be viewed against the backdrop of what's already happened in Europe. NATO is disintegrating. This is not some strong, cohesive alliance, far from it. And the three principal allies, I call them the three amigos, London, Paris, and Berlin, are in bad shape. Their Lilliputian armies can't fight anybody. They're certainly not up to confront the battle-hardened Russian military establishment that has straightened out whatever was wrong and is now doing better than ever. So he's kind of in a fantasy world. He doesn't I assume he understands, but perhaps he doesn't understand what's happening to us economically, the debasement of our currency, the de-dollarization, and the destination for us is default. The sooner we do it, the better. But I don't think we're going to do it at all. I think we're just going to grind ourselves down to nothing, which I think is probably the preferred outcome for Wall Street. But it's disastrous for us as a people.
Yeah, you say you don't know that he knows. He started off his UN speech today by talking about how the United States was the hottest country in the world, and we have the greatest economy by far. We have the greatest military by far. We produce more than everybody else. Sometimes you think, well, that's just him bloviating like he does. But then you have to ask, maybe he actually believes that, because if he's basing actions on that belief, then, as you say, we could be in a world of hurt. Now, you mentioned something about NATO, and I want to pivot there, because there's also things happening off the headlines there that are very important, probably should be on the headlines. And that is, here of late, there's been a lot of claims that Russia has been violating the airspace of Poland and Estonia, and since June, Romania, Norway, Finland, and Sweden. And so now all of a sudden, there's been a lot of alarm that's saying, all right, no more. We're going to have this Eastern Shield that NATO is going to put up there. We're going to use lots of additional alliance firepower to protect against what may come from Russia. And then now the verbal parts are starting to get heated up as well. And I want to start first of all with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, who's saying, if necessary, we'll shoot down Russian jets.
If necessary, yes, we will shoot down a plane. Or, of course, we already shot down a drone. If necessary, and this exactly comes back to what I just mentioned, that we will always assess the situation, assess the immediate threat the plane poses, and acting quickly and decisively is exactly what happened in these two cases. And I'm really proud of our fighter jet pilots doing this, and our commanders in contact with them, coordinating all these activities. Clearly, what the Russians are doing is not acceptable. If it is intentional or not, at least it is reckless. And it should stop, absolutely. And what they will see now, over the last couple of weeks, is that whatever happens, we are there. And it will not, as you've seen in the next statement, detract us from supporting Ukraine, if that is what they might be thinking they could achieve. I don't know what is in their minds. If it was intentional, again, we are still assessing that. We will also keep on supporting Ukraine with even more vigor and more determination.
Doug, let's look at first of all, the initial claim that Russia intentionally violated the airspace of Poland with allegedly 19 drones, but so far only a few grainy photographs have been produced at all, and certainly not any evidence. And there's a lot of potential that this wasn't even real at all, that it was something manufactured by the Western side to just cast Russia in a bad light, who themselves said that, no, we did not send any drones into Poland. What do you make of what actually happened at the core of that?
Well, first, let's admit that Rutte's words were bravely spoken. He sounds like a man who is defiantly shaking his fist at the enemies of mankind and sort of reminding everybody that this fight will go on until evil has been vanquished. It's a lot of nonsense. It's horse dung. We've looked at this, and NATO looked at this. I'm talking about NATO headquarters and the military headquarters in Mons have looked at this whole allegation. The first thing that NATO concluded and said publicly was this was not an attack on NATO. Okay. Rule that out right off the bat. Well, if it's not an attack, what is it? Is it something along the lines that you described? Is this Ukrainians capturing electronically some of these unmanned aerial vehicles and directing them towards Poland or Lithuania? I have no idea. Did someone in Norway up near the Arctic Circle sight a Russian unmanned aerial vehicle on the edge of the air defense identification zone and conclude that it had strayed into their airspace? I have no idea. I do know that the jets that were launched didn't seem to have much success against these targets in the air because less than 20% of them were struck. And I know from someone on the ground in Poland who checked it carefully that the debris that fell on a house in central Poland was not from an unmanned aerial vehicle. It seems to have come from an unexploded munition launched by one of the jets. I think the whole thing is hot air. It's nonsense. But what's depressing about the whole thing is that this is one more last gasp as an effort to drag us, the United States, into a war with Russia, because that's what it's all about. These are little nations. They have armed forces. The Polish army, by the way, is very, very good. It's probably better than the other three armies, German, French, and British. But it's too small to make a dent. About the only thing they can do is deploy another 10 or 15,000 troops to the border with Belarus or Ukraine. But to launch a major operation, an offensive on the ground, they don't have the depth, they don't have the experience, they don't have the organizational construct to support it. All of this is just hot air. And I think it's getting hotter by the day because the position of the globalists who've been running the show in Europe is eroding very, very rapidly. The three amigos are all going to go down. They're not going to survive. And this Polish president, President Nawrocki, had better read the tea leaves, because the only intelligent thing he said since he became president was his announcement that under no circumstances would any Polish soldiers fight in Ukraine against Russia. And he noted that roughly 10,000 Poles were killed inside Ukrainian uniform for fighting against the Russians. Nobody has an appetite for that in Europe at all. So Rutte is full of hot air, but he's also dangerous because he creates the illusion that there's some readiness for war which doesn't exist. And this could easily result in an accident. Somebody somewhere along the line of contact, which is the eastern front of NATO, could suddenly come into contact accidentally with something that's Russian, and you have an incident, and the whole thing erupts into an all-out war. I mean, I hope not. So I think the rhetoric needs to cool off because it's all nonsense. It's not going to happen.